Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Terry B. McDougall about the hurdles and blind spots leaders face when encouraging innovation and productivity in their teams and organizations. Terry McDougall, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Jonathan, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a nice conversation today and to focus on the blind spots that leaders have in trying to encourage and promote and sustain innovation and productivity within their teams and within their organizations. I think this is a huge problem that organizations face. And it comes back to, not just good intentions, which certainly, we need to start with intentionality and we need to start with aspirations, but then we need to translate that into actual action to be able to produce the results that we want. And sometimes, there are definitely obstacles and hurdles that get in the way of us doing that. So this is what we'll be exploring together today. As we get started, I wanted to share Terry's bio with everybody. Terry McDougall is an executive and career coach and CEO of the Terry B. McDougall Coaching. She helps high-achieving professionals remove obstacles that keep them stuck so they can enjoy more success and satisfaction in their lives and careers. Before becoming a coach, Terry was a longtime corporate marketing executive where she led teams, developed strategies, and advised senior leaders to drive business results. She's the author of Winning the Game of Work, Career Happiness and Success on Your Own Terms. She is also the host of the Marketing Mambo podcast. What a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Anything else you would like to share with listeners by way of your background before we launch on in?
No, I think you pretty much covered it.
Wonderful. Well, so let's dive right in and talk about some of these hurdles. What do you see as the biggest hurdles that keep organizations from tapping into the full potential of their people?
Well, I think that there's a couple things. I think that there's a lack of awareness that maybe this is even needed. And certainly there's, in many cases, a lack of skills. Some of the things that I've recognized is, we all know that businesses are in place to make a profit, and there can be an oversized emphasis on execution at the expense of everything else. And focusing on execution and putting a lot of pressure on team members can actually have the opposite effect that's desired. And what's really important is for leaders to lay the foundation for effective execution. And that means spending time on things that many think are unnecessary, but are actually really critical. And that starts with communication. It's being clear with people, having two-way dialogue. So if there are issues, that the leaders learn about them and can actually do something to fix the issues. But also things as simple as, well, what are we trying to achieve here? Sometimes there's a lot of assumptions made that everybody understands that. And in fact, leaders haven't done a good job of communicating that down in a way that their employees can understand. The second thing is building strong relationships. When there are relationships and productive relationships, there's trust there. So people feel confident in taking action or stepping into uncertainty because they know and they trust the people around them that they're not going to be at risk or, all of the bad things that we think about, be embarrassed, get in trouble, get fired, be put on a PIP plan, whatever the things are that people worry about, if they're feeling insecure, they're not going to show up 100%. So it's important to make sure that those relationships are in place so there's trust there. And then the last part of that foundation is having alignment. Because again, we can make, as leaders, we can make these assumptions that, you've sat in the meetings with your other senior leaders, and we all hear through our own lens, if you will, or our own filter. And sometimes we don't check those assumptions, like, well, this is what I heard. Is this what you heard? And so sometimes leaders can actually be working at cross purposes. They think that they're all doing the right thing, and from their perspective, they are, but they're maybe pulling in opposite directions because they haven't checked for alignment. And then that causes conflict. A lot of times you see this among coworkers or between departments because they haven't stepped back to say, well, why do you think that? Or why don't we put the problem on the table and figure out how we can work together to fix this problem that we share instead of playing the blame game.
Yeah,
So
I love those. And I think the foundational components that you're describing are absolutely essential. So I'm glad you highlighted that. So often we jump directly into action and implementation without
yeah,
understanding really these foundational pieces that set the stage and create the environment and the culture necessary to sustain ongoing, good outcomes, ongoing
yeah, yeah,
productivity, right?
exactly. And there's always a lot of pressure to perform and to execute. And there can be pressure to skip these really foundational steps, but typically we'll pay for it later if we don't do it. And when we can withstand the pressure or the discomfort of saying, no, I can't do it on Monday, I'll 2 weeks from now we'll kick it off. I always say well planned is well executed. And so if you lay a strong foundation and then that machine can be put on the foundation and it can run smoothly versus just plopping it down anywhere and trying to run the machine and it's like out of whack, and you spend more time fixing things than allowing things to run efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're describing too, it describes for me the challenge, at least one of the major challenges that we have when we're trying to foster an environment of innovation within an organization. Because if people feel like they're only going to be judged on their what they produce, as opposed to the learnings, as opposed to how they develop new ideas, how they iterate in new spaces, then inevitably what's going to happen is people are going to start to focus on the low-hanging fruit. What things can they do that are going to produce immediate results that they can show to their boss so they can get a bonus or so they can get a pat on the back or whatever. And that's not always completely at odds with ongoing innovation and sustainable growth and development, but it really can be, and it can directly undermine the efforts that you might be trying to take in other areas. And innovation requires quote unquote failure. And I say quote unquote because it's only failure if we don't learn from it, right? Innovation requires iteration. It requires learning and ongoing growth and development. And so we have to create a psychologically safe place where people can try new things, where they know not only are they allowed to try new things, but they're encouraged to, they're supported in doing it, and it's not going to hurt them for trying something that doesn't end up working out the way they'd hoped it did.
Yeah. I think that the trick is really to get the balance of support and challenge correct for leaders, or for leaders to get that correct for themselves. Um, Often you see leaders who, maybe they've been really strong individual contributors, and when they run into issues, they sort of have the Superman syndrome where they'll like fly in to save the day, and they actually are in some ways handicapping their employees from stepping fully into what they're totally capable of doing. It's just that the leader needs to learn a different skill set to be able to translate the knowledge that they have to those employees, and they need to learn to trust them and also tolerate, maybe the learning curve and some mistakes along the way. But when they're able to maybe dial back on the support or the enablement and to challenge those employees a little bit more and to tolerate that learning curve, and then it really starts to liberate the employees. They feel proud, they feel like their leader believes in them, they feel like their leader has their back, so they feel like they can take more risks, they can explore, they can be curious. But when I like to use the analogy of, if you've ever played baseball or softball and you've been in the outfield and there's one player who feels like they can cover the whole outfield themselves, that you just get used to not even trying, because you're like, oh, that guy's going to come and snag the fly ball right in front of me. But then if at some point they decide not to do that, and then the ball just falls to the ground, because it's in some ways a learned helplessness, which unfortunately a
Yeah.
lot of really strong leaders do this, and they don't recognize the cost of that kind of behavior. And a lot of it at times, it's because they're fearful of things not being perfect, and they're afraid that somebody else learning is going to reflect poorly on them, and they don't have the tolerance to allow that to happen, which it's not good for organizations when leaders aren't willing to provide some leeway for their employees to learn and to step fully into their own potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and it could be just full on good intentions misplaced. So sometimes it's control issues, it's handing
Mm-hmm.
over power, it's allowing people to have autonomy and
Yeah.
to delegate and to truly do that. And there's sometimes there's just issues with leaders being able to do that. But a lot of times leaders also just, they see someone who needs help and they want to step in and they want to help. And it's like parenting in a
Yeah.
sense that, like, I can't do everything for my kid. I want to do everything for my kid. I want to protect them from everything. I want to make sure that they live like this
Yeah. Sure.
easy, joyful, blissful life. But the reality is they're not going to learn, they're not going to grow, they're not going to develop the character they need unless they have the opportunity to try and fail and learn and grow. And so as leaders, I need to ask myself, if I'm seeing someone struggling, what type of struggle is it? And is it the debilitating type of struggle that can, that will really hurt them? Or is it the learning kind of struggle that's going to strengthen them? And, as a leader, I want to break down barriers and provide opportunities and support for my people to the extent possible, in terms of organizational, structural, bureaucratic barriers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I can't take away all of the struggle and all the challenge that my people are going to face in the day-to-day of them doing their jobs, because that's part of the deal. That's part of the growth that they need to. And if they're going to grow into their potential and they're going to have successful careers, they got to learn how to navigate that. They have to learn how to
Yeah.
deal with it.
I'm excited to announce the publication of my new book from HCI Press, Bluer Than Indigo Leadership: The Journey of Becoming a Truly Remarkable Leader. Early in my adult life, I learned about an Asian proverb that translates as bluer than indigo. If you think about the color indigo, it is a brilliant, deep, and vibrant blue, what some would call the bluest of blues. To have something that is bluer than indigo is rare and truly remarkable. Contrary to popular myth, there is no one-size-fits-all or cookie-cutter approach to effective leadership. There's no silver bullet, no secret sauce, no go-to model that will solve all of our problems. The truth is, great leaders have all had their unique strengths and flaws, and have all had to discover and then pave their own distinctive path in their life's journey to fulfill their leadership potential. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership will help you discover your own path and explore those ordinary, everyday actions that will help you respond to an uncertain future and produce extraordinary results for individuals, teams, and organizations.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for leaders to, when they feel that compulsion to go in and help or support, is to really take a beat and to say, what kind of support do they need? Right? What's going to serve them in the long term? Is it me going in and doing it for them, which I think for many leaders, that's their first instinct. But that's really not sustainable, right? Because as you move up in organizations, your span of control increases. And that means that you cannot jump in every time somebody stubs their toe to fix the situation for them. It might mean that you have to step back and say, do I need to develop training? Do I need to pair them up with someone else that can teach them? That doesn't need to be me. And, to your point, I think that pride of ownership is a huge motivator. And yes, it can be difficult to deal with that challenge when you're new, or you've, as an employee, are just experiencing something that you don't know how to do. But that's how we learn how to do it. You brought up being a parent. I'm a parent of 3 children. They're pretty much grown now, but I wrote about something similar in my book, a kind of an analogy, which is that, when your children are really young, say they're like 2 years old and they're learning how to feed themselves, or, maybe even a year old, and they get more food on them than they get in their mouth, right? Like you've got the pureed peaches and the hair, and their hands are a mess, and we still allow them to learn to feed themselves because it's just part of the process. But if we expect this to be perfect, we might just go on spoon feeding them until they're 12 years old, and that doesn't help, right? You don't want to be 80 and spoon feeding your 50-year-old, right? It's
I think of another example with my kids. My youngest daughter, I have 6 children, 4 girls, 2 boys. My youngest daughter, when she was a toddler, she just refused to learn how to go up and down stairs.
Yeah.
And what she would do, which was smart for a little toddler to do, is she would just get to the stairs and she would just scream. Mm-hmm. And then, we had other kids we were wrangling, and we were like, stop the screaming. And so we would just pick her up and then carry her up or carry her down. Yeah. And she learned how to navigate without doing stairs until we finally just decided, okay, we're not going to do it. We're going to make her do it. And she figured it out, lo and behold. Right. Yes. And it's a silly, small little example, but we see these examples all around us in life all the time. And I think most people, we talk about these silly examples with kids, and we're like, yeah, you got to let kids learn how to do stuff. Yeah. But then we get into the workplace and we see an employee who doesn't know how to do something, and we don't remember, like that's how we go about developing. And so, yes, provide support. Yes, provide training. Yes, create an engaging, psychologically safe environment where people can try and fail. Yes to all of that. But then we also need to step back a little bit and allow people to just take ownership over what they're doing and to grow. And
we need to challenge them. We need to challenge them, and your daughter, I'm sure that it was a challenge for her to be like, hey, screaming doesn't work anymore. I was just thinking about, she's got 5 older siblings and then 2 parents, that she probably was able to navigate the whole house without ever touching the ground, because I know how it is with the baby of the family, right? There's so many people that can care for them that a lot of times they're like, oh, I don't have to learn how to do that. Somebody else will do it for me. And that actually happens in the workplace a lot. And, sometimes as leaders, we can be blind to that, right? Because maybe people have learned to maybe get other people to do the things that they don't want to do. But when we zero in on that, if it's something that's really an expectation of the job, at some point we're going to have to, proverbially hold their feet to the fire, right? To be like, no, this is really something that you need to master. And that's where the challenge comes in. And it's interesting because some people are more comfortable with the support, and some people are more comfortable with the challenge. When leaders challenge too much and don't provide support, typically what you find is that There's a lot of fear. People are afraid that they're going to get called out or they're going to get blamed. They will typically do the minimum that is required for them not to get fired, but they don't do more because they're fearful of making mistakes. They're fearful of taking anything new on because there's no support in terms of training or tolerance for that learning curve. And so, and a lot of times bosses may swing, vacillate between those two. Like, okay, I'm going to be here and I'm going to support you. I'm going to do all this stuff for you. But when people don't like immediately step up and take it on, and then they say, oh, just get out of my way, or they'll come down on the employees really hard. And so they've kind of gone to this more of like dominating style. And I mean, we can see the same thing in parenting, right? Like, we're parents that spoil their children but then yell at them when the kids aren't getting it. And it's really important from a leadership standpoint, whether it's parenting or being in the workplace, to get the balance right and to focus enough on the skill of leadership to recognize, what do I need to do? What do I need to adjust here? Do I need to put a little more, challenge, or do I need to step back and think, like, how do I support? What's the right thing to do here? But when you get the balance right, a lot of times, then it's just a matter of like slight course corrections, because people will lead themselves. You just have to, paint a really vivid picture of the vision and put it in context for your employees so that they understand how they fit into this really attractive vision. And if you get that right, people will just, it really is a lot more about self-leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a lot about really this kind of spectrum of involvement and control that leaders might have when they're trying to support or inadvertently undermine their people. Do you see other blind spots that leaders often have when they're trying to encourage innovation and productivity at work?
Well, I think that sometimes leaders haven't mentally promoted themselves. Like, if they've moved up within the organization, and if they've come, from being a individual contributor or maybe like a player coach, when they move to the next level, again, they don't think like, what's appropriate at this level of leadership, and how do I transmit the knowledge that I have to my direct reports so that they can do what I used to do. But a lot of times when people don't do that, they're actually competing with their own direct reports. They're jumping in and they're doing things, and it causes a lot of confusion. So I think getting a lot of clarity about roles and responsibilities, including yours as the leader, is really critical. And one of the things I've seen a lot of times that's at the heart of this for particularly new leaders, but not always, is that they don't value their contributions enough. They don't really step back and say, well, what is it that I bring? Sometimes people don't feel worthy of being in that position, and so they feel like they've got to do more rather than step into a true leadership role. And then maybe it's that they actually haven't had good role models for that, or they haven't stepped back enough to say, wow, like, my perspective or my insights is actually worth a lot to this organization. I say all the time that you can't read the label from inside the bottle, that we're just kind of walking around being who we are. And we don't think it's any big deal. We're just kind of like, I'm just, Jenny from the block, right? Nothing special about me. But the reality is, if you have moved up, someone probably sees something special in you. And it's probably important for you to recognize what it is that is valuable and that you're bringing to the table, and lean into it, believe that what you're bringing is valuable so that you can stay in your own spot and you can empower the people that work for you to also lean into their potential. I mean, that's how you tune the machine so that it moves to maximum productivity and efficiency.
Yeah, yeah. And part of what you're describing there sounds like imposter syndrome. That
Yeah,
is
for
super,
sure.
super common. It's interesting because you tend to have, I mean, it's a spectrum, I suppose, but I think you have some leaders that just kind of have this arrogance about them, and they
Yeah.
just think they're the greatest things since sliced
Yes.
bread.
Yeah. A
And
little
then
bit
you
of
have,
narcissism.
and then you have others who don't give themselves enough credit
Yeah, for
for
sure.
they're a
For
little bit
sure.
too humble and they don't give
Yeah.
themselves enough credit for all the things they've done, and they're probably experiencing imposter syndrome. And so there's a
Mhm.
healthy balance between confidence and
Yes.
humility, and
Yes.
and then how that translates into how you interact with your people. Well, Terry, it has been a real pleasure. I note the time, it's flown by. I want to make sure I give you an opportunity to get back to your busy day. But before we close, I wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about your work, your book, your team, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, sure. So people can go to my website, terrybmcdougall.com. There's a link to my calendar there if anybody wants to talk to me about one-on-one coaching, or I also do consulting with organizations to help them create more of a positive leadership environment. I'm very active on LinkedIn. My handle there is Terry B. McDougall. I'd be happy to get connected with any of your listeners. My podcast is Marketing Mambo. It's on all of the podcast platforms. It also has its own website, marketingmambo.net. I just talk to a lot of super interesting people in and around the world of marketing. And then finally, my book, Winning the Game of Work, is available on Barnes & Noble and Amazon.com worldwide. And then the final word, recognize the power of true leadership. And if you have been entrusted with being a leader, really think about what your role is and lean into it. Paint that picture of where you and your team are going. Help people to understand their place within that vision, and get that balance right between support and challenge. And I think that if you're able to do that, you're going to see that you'll be able to do amazing things.
Amen. Well said. Thank you so much, Terry. It has been a real pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Terry can do for you. Check out the podcast, the book, all the many great things. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. They can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.
The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership. Ordinary, everyday actions that produce extraordinary results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life. Check out Human Capital Innovations magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine with the mission to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We publish issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Take a look at the latest issue and let us know what you think.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.